Hello and welcome to the 7th Ademola Bookmen Podcast. I'm recording here from my pillow fort with my friend John Coughlin. Hi, Johnny.
Hi, Al. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. And this week, we've been doing Leaving Las Vegas. Is it? No. Train Spotting? No. It's Back from the Brink, Paul McGrath's autobiography.
Yeah. Back from the brink.
I'm not sure he was back from the brink.
No, he's not back from the brink. He's teetering on the edge of it, yeah. Al, this book was recommended by Galway United's own Colm Horgan. This weekend, this Friday, he's playing against Paul McGrath's old team, St. Patrick's Athletic. That's fun, isn't it?
Well, that is a nice little bit of kismet.
Yeah.
Well, thanks you very much indeed, Colm, for the many laughs you gave us over this past couple of weeks. What a joyful book. Bloody hell.
And good luck against St. Pat's.
Okay, so I complained about Didier Drogba, there being too much football in the last book. Well, there's barely any football in this one. So, Johnny, Paul McGrath, there's an introduction, and he's described as unquestionably Ireland's most popular sportsman. Now, is that your view?
There's a certain affection towards McGrath that is maybe unique in a way amongst, I'm talking about football fans now, really. I mean, Keane is probably Roy Keane that is probably has a bigger status or profile, but that's a different relationship as well, and it's also complicated by what happened in 2002. He's not universally liked, but McGrath is universally liked. There's something about this kind of the fact that he's this flawed and damaged character, and I don't know. There's something about him that, touches. We're very fond of him for whatever reason. Yeah.
Yeah, Fergie likens him to George Best.
Yeah, exactly.
Very flawed genius. So, Paul McGrath, he's not before my time, but he is a little bit. I think
a little bit. Like in his club career, yeah, but I remember him for his Ireland highlights, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what does he mean to you, Paul McGrath, Johnny?
Well, he's part of that team. He mentions it in the book, obviously, that Ireland had never qualified for anything until 1988, and then between 1988 and 1994, they qualified for 3 tournaments, so 1 Euros and 2 World Cups. Yeah, I think it really created some kind of like football awakening, if you want. You said he's a bit before your time. Like the World Cup in 1990, that's really some of my first memories. And it really, when Ireland has been in World Cups, it's really taken a hold of the country in a kind of a crazy, crazy way. And he talks about it in the book, that it would be difficult to explain to colleagues in England how they created this kind of pandemonium in Ireland in competitions where, like, in 1990, they didn't even win a game. In 1994, they won 1 game and they lost 2. So, yeah, it's a funny thing, really. But, yeah, like, I guess for a small country, just to be on the international stage, I guess it really caught the public imagination.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, he says he came back after 1990 with the 3 draws, and they had a proper open bus celebration around Dublin.
Yeah, and he talks about the other one in 1984, which I was at, which Boyzone played at. That was pretty exciting, wasn't it? But and he said that the plane banked around Dublin so they could look down on this, mass of people who'd come to welcome home for this from the World Cup. And that game, and it's also what he starts with in the book, that game against Italy in 1994 when he played with his arm hanging limply by his side, that is really remembered as his kind of greatest Ireland performance. When we beat the Italians in Giant Stadium.
Where were you watching that game, Johnny?
I was on a family holiday in Portugal.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
I was on a family holiday in Cyprus, and I didn't watch the game. Indeed, I didn't watch a single fucking game from the 94 World Cup. Because guess what? England didn't qualify, so I didn't care.
You've been at everyone since, though, haven't you?
Yes, we have. Yeah, no, I was very much that way. My team get knocked out of the FA Cup, don't care. England not in it, don't care.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I just before we get into the book, will you indulge me one thing, Al?
I sure will.
I think there's probably a few things that Irish people enjoy more than English people not being able to pronounce Irish things. So I'm going to spell a place name from this book to you, and I want you to try and pronounce it.
Oh, I got a pen on me. Fine.
Okay.
Fire away.
So D-U, and like an accent, we call it a fada. D-U-N is one word.
Yeah.
And then the second word is L-A-O-G-H-A-I-R-E. That's, two words. So can you pronounce that for me?
Dunlagawa.
One more time.
Dunlagawa.
No, it's not that. That's Dunleary.
Dunleary. Oh, of course it is. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it was the G that threw me off.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Well, Irish people enjoy that. Maybe Irish people had enjoyed me doing my Irish accent. Shall I do that?
Yeah, go on.
No, I won't, Johnny. I won't.
Anyway, yeah, so Paul McGrath, Back from the Brink from 2006, which he wrote just as his career had kind of finished. At the end of the book, he's stopped playing, and I think the whole thing has, like, as we mentioned, the book is called Back from the Brink, but I think the book, even when it ends, he's not really sure where he is in his life, and I think it's an optimistic title if you want, but I understand McGrath as well now. Like, I was looking online, and he seems to be well. He's not in the news very much, McGrath, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah. I also had a look up. He has had some problems in the intervening years, but nothing for 10 years, right? I think he seems fairly solid.
To you, as a football supporting Englishman, what would you think of Paul McGrath?
I remember him a bit for Villa, but I can't say I was really, really like intent on watching Villa in the mid to early 90s. There were more interesting and more successful teams at the time. But yeah, I've always known him to be a really super defender. I just didn't realise McGrath's boozing. It really wasn't boozing, was it? He's a sick fellow, and like, it's brought him nothing but grief.
I don't know why, but when I read books of footballers of a certain vintage, the kind of nights out are kind of part of the fun, and there's lots of nights out in this, but they ain't much fun.
No, it's sordid, isn't it? It's a sordid story. He's the man who can't control himself. He doesn't really seem to have any friends, real friends. He has a lot of people who he hangs around with, but I mean, it always strikes me. I mean, his friends were always enabling him. I know that's a modern word, but they all work, right? It was like, my old pal there would pass me the vodkas to hide it from the boss. It's like, well, maybe we shouldn't have been passing you the vodkas.
Yeah. Well, I suppose one of the common themes in the book, I suppose, is, well, firstly, the book is unusual in that it's obviously McGrath is the main voice in the book, but it's throughout it, every couple of pages, there's a paragraph from somebody who was around at the time, his mother, his son, but a lot of the times it's the people who are around, the Ferguson is there in the United years. Kevin Moran shows up a lot. It's unusual, but quite a few of them, and Moran in particular says a couple of times, like he just didn't really know the depths of it, Like, so McGrath was obviously quite good at hiding his problems.
Yeah, he was. And, from the outside looking in, it just seems like fun scrapes. I mean, like, it's kind of stories you'd retell when you're 20s. It's like, you never guess where I ended up. And it would be laughs and japes. But for him, it's not, because once he started drinking, he really didn't know where he's going to end up.
There was a quote from Ron Atkinson towards the end of the book, which I thought was kind of really, after reading, like, it's right at the end, and I thought it was kind of summed up McGrath really well, so I'm just going to read it to you. Paul was different, shy, basically. I've always said that you could tell him he was playing against Signore, Maradona, Ian Rush, any of them. It's not a problem. Sure, grand boss. But I remember we asked him to go to a junior school once just to present these medals, because he was a god at Villa then. Everyone wanted him. Everyone loved him. We're telling him, all you've got to do is say, well done, and shake their hands. But he was adamant. Can't do it, boss. and he couldn't. He reckoned he'd panicked, so he never went to the school. Like, it's incredible, isn't it? Like, to have this kind of, I guess, dual personality in a way where you're this titan when you're playing football, but then you can't like stand in front of like whatever 20 kids. It's quite incredible, really.
Yeah, intense social anxiety. So can we go right back to the start? So he was born of his mother Betty and a Nigerian immigrant. Is that right?
Yeah. So his mother, got pregnant with an African man, and then he kind of just he didn't want anything to do with it. And this was in Dublin in the 1950s. McGrath was born in 1959. You couldn't think of a much worse kind of circumstance for Betty to find herself really in an extremely white and in an extremely conservative society. Yeah, so she went off to London to have him.
Yeah, that's right. And she was pressured to give him up for adoption, and she does.
Yeah, initially she was going to give him up in England, I think, but then I think she managed to negotiate bringing him back to Dublin, and it's really, really quite a horrible scene, isn't it? This young girl, she was very young at the time, coming back on the boat. She'd made the decision to give the child for adoption, and then she's connecting with the child, obviously, as they come home, but there's these nuns waiting for her when she arrives in Dublin, and they take the baby from her. It's horrible.
Yeah, and he goes to a place called the Smiley Trust.
Yeah, so the Smiley Trust, not that anyone would know it, but like it's a kind of a Protestant run charity that runs these kind of homes for orphans.
And this sounds like just a very, very sad childhood. He feels unwanted. His mother subsequently has another child, a daughter, a Cooney, with a different African immigrant. Is that right?
Exactly, yeah.
And this child has a lot of problems, but the mother hangs on to a Cooney. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So Paul obviously felt doubly betrayed because his mother was there with another child when she feels she couldn't look after him. And it really is a sad childhood. And it seems the only real joy he got was when he was booting a football around.
He had a terrible, tough time. The first place he was in was called the Bird's Nest. And he said that violence was routine. He learned later that some kids were sexually abused, but this is not something that he experienced himself. But he wet the bed routinely until he was 16. And he said the thing that really caused him a lot of anxiety growing up was these morning inspections when they'd have to kind of present their sheets for kind of inspection. And yeah, it just sounds absolutely appalling. And he was here until he was 16, and then he went to another home run by the same crowd, this Smiley's Trust.
But this is where he really starts playing football and all. In fact, he's a lot happier at this home. In fact, other kids and other friends of his start hanging around this home.
What I found interesting and sad, obviously, but interesting, is that he says that if you're brought up in this kind of environment, as much as you might hate the kind of institution and where you are, you do become institutionalized, and you become reliant on the structures, I suppose, and the routine. And one thing that struck me anyway was like when this last place he was in was called Racefield. And when he was preparing to leave Racefield, he was kind of nervous about it. But when he didn't leave, he had a total breakdown. So he's leaving institutionalized care for the first time in his life, moving into this flat, and he just kind of had a breakdown and ended up in a mental health facility, a psychiatric ward.
It's genuinely shocking in the book. It's genuinely shocking. I mean, he becomes catatonic for months on end. For months on end. Just as his football career was kicking off. He said people have to come over to smooth his bed sores and stuff. He's there, wouldn't speak. He doesn't make as much of it as I think he could in terms of how incredibly traumatizing that must have been for him.
Like if he was on American Idol, he'd be making a much bigger song and dance about it.
I was catatonic. Yeah, he doesn't do any of that. There's very little self-pity, which is great.
Yeah, it's a real stiff upper lip stuff, Al, isn't it? As you say, he doesn't make he says that visitors. He was in this hospital, St. Vincent's. Visitors would come, like friends, family, or whatever, and they'd find him naked, covered in his own piss, you know. And so it was like he had this severe breakdown, and he wasn't being kept in good conditions whatsoever. And eventually he was moved out to his mother's home, and it happened again. Like, he was kind of recovering, and then he broke down again. So, and yeah, I'd say, like, what's really incredible is, like, within a period of months from, like, as you say, being catatonic, being mute, he was playing for Manchester United. Like, a remarkable change of circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, they obviously this period where he is catatonic is in the book, but it's never really explained. It's just something that happened, and then within, yeah, as you say, within weeks or months, there he is off to United.
And sorry, the point I was trying to make earlier is, like, something that I noticed in the book. When there were changes in his life subsequently, managers coming and going, changing club, he did seem to have breakdowns as well. So it was like he was repeating that pattern when he left the like, it's like when he became comfortable in it, because he's got this incredible social anxiety, like incredible social anxiety. And when he settles into a pattern and a situation that he's comfortable with, he's happy. And when that breaks, he seems to have these breakdowns. That was a common theme in the book. I noticed that it seemed that a lot, like, he has these episodes so regularly that you'd lose count, but a lot of them do seem to coincide when he has a change of circumstance, personal or professional.
Yeah, that's right. He said he took leaving clubs and changing managers very hard indeed. When I guess as a footballer, you got to expect that.
But if there's a shining knight in this book, Ron Atkinson seems like a nice man, doesn't he?
Ron Atkinson comes across great, doesn't he? He really does.
Yeah, and obviously later he was he had kind of a racism scandal, didn't he?
He certainly did.
But in this book, he comes across as a great guy to be around.
Yeah, he's absolutely loved him. His first meeting, they were negotiating a contract, right? He got very short shrift out of Big Ron. Very short shrift, but he came to really genuinely love him, didn't he? He really loves Big Ron at the end.
On the drinking thing, it was when he was playing in Dublin. He went on a trip to Germany, like a tour with his team, and that's the first time he drank. And I think from the very start, he couldn't really handle drinking in the sense that he drank to be paralytic, He went to Germany, he drank for a couple of weeks, thought this is great because it helped him deal with this anxiety. But then he came back and he just kind of said, okay, he didn't drink for a while for whatever reason.
Yeah. It's also funny that he goes back on holiday with his friend back to the exact same place he's been to. He's like, I'll tell you a nice place for a holiday. Germany. Let's go there.
This kind of like industrial town in the Ruhr heartland.
Well, I've been there and I liked it personally. So it's a great spot.
And it turns out it wasn't as good the second time round when he went without his football team.
It was very strange thinking. Yeah, I went there once. Yeah, I think we should go again.
Does Norman Whiteside mean much to you?
Yeah, I'm very conscious of Norman Whiteside. He's the youngest player to score a goal at the World Cup, or at least he was.
Yeah.
And he immediately befriends Paul McGrath, right? He immediately befriends him. He says, like, do you want me to do my Northern Irish accent? No, I won't do it. But then, like, it's bad enough you're a Protestant from Dublin, but you're black as well. And Paul McGrath loves this. Paul McGrath loves this, and he quickly becomes his best friend, right?
Under Atkinson, United never finished below fourth, but they never finished above third, and they won the FA Cup twice. And the few people who speak in the book, like I say, Kevin Moran and Frank Stapleton, these guys, they were saying that, like, they really had a pretty brilliant team, and comparable, they thought, in terms of players to the Liverpool team at the time. But yeah, maybe it was the boozing that was holding them back.
Yeah, it sounds like, because they refer to it. They tell Ron Atkinson, hey, look, those Liverpool lads are big drinkers too. But Ron's like, yeah, but they get it done on the pitch. Yeah. Or, lads, try not drinking so much and see if you do better.
Did you enjoy another Steve McMahon incident in the book?
I was happy to see Steve McMahon. He always comes up in the villain role as well, doesn't he?
Every time, yeah.
It's like, got a good word for Steve McMahon.
It's like football book bingo. Someone delighted to hear Steve McMahon, ding. there's kind of a theme, with the exception of Ferguson, I suppose. Managers throughout McGrath's career ultimately forgave him his sins because he performed. And Atkinson was no different. Like he'd be apoplectic with McGrath over the booze, but it would never really last. Like McGrath tells a story there where they went to Swaziland, interesting in itself, for a for a preseason trip, and they're playing against Spurs, and he drank 12 pints on the day of the game. What?
Yeah, they do. And that's it. Ron says, "Go on, get out there. Go on, you do a great job."
They seem to have been good, and like I suppose like Whiteside would have been very good. Like Robson obviously is a very good player, but they weren't winning anything. But in 1984 they were top of the league with 10 games to go. They'd beaten Arsenal 4-0, but then they went on a week-long trip to Mallorca and they came back to lose 2-0 against West Brom, who were the bottom team in the league. So there you go. I think, but you know, like the funny thing about it is like, again, like Ron Atkinson, who's kind of just this kind of charismatic, kind of probably quite rough kind of character. He was the one who was pushing that trip to Mallorca.
I mean, it's incredible, how different the game is, but that really was the prevailing wisdom at the time, right? That drinking encouraged bonding amongst team players, and bonding amongst team players resulted in winning teams.
But also in terms of preparation, not just drinking, it's like Atkinson would only play games, as in football games, in training. There was nothing physical. And they said that all Liverpool ever did was five-a-side. Like, that's a lovely way to prepare for a football match. Better than Didier Drogba with his 3 hours of stretching, like.
That's stretching. I think the Liverpool lads were having them on there because they asked him, "What do you do at Liverpool?" And they tell them, "Oh, yeah, we just do five-a-sides all day." And they're like, "Okie dokie, good enough for us."
But Ron paid the price for their reputation. He got the bullet in 1986.
And in comes.
Yeah.
Dun, 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 dun. Fergie. We sort of remember him warmly now, but I tell you what, at the time, I fucking hated that man. I fucking hated him with a passion.
Why?
Because he's a cheat. Fucking Fergie time. Always moaning about the ref. He was awful. He always got everything his own way. What? How long did it go without United giving away a penalty at Old Trafford? Like 50 years. Like, it was unbelievable. I couldn't stand Fergie. Now, obviously.
There was a good, an interesting related point there later in the book. So the season that Bruce scored these 2 goals against Wednesday, which is obviously very famous, when they won the Premier League for the first time, it was Villa that they were, competing for to win the league. And Atkinson says at some point that he spoke to Carlton Palmer, who was playing for Wednesday at the time. And Palmer asked the ref around 90 minutes, "What's left, ref?" The ref said 3 minutes. And then United scored on the 98th minute. Incredible.
Yeah.
Ferguson came in, and that was when things had to change.
And he is resentful. I think he understands why Fergie did it, but he says, if he could have handled it differently, tried to get the best out of me. Yeah, but I think that's harsh. Fergie wasn't there to babysit players, was he? He was there to make Manchester United what he went on to make them.
And what was interesting, I thought, was Ferguson's, both of them had kind of were I think more magnanimous maybe as the years went on. So McGrath says, as you say, he kind of accepts Ferguson's decision and understood the logic years later. And from Ferguson's point of view, he said that, like, if he had dealt with this situation later in his managerial career, maybe he would have went about it differently. Maybe he would have given McGrath an arm around the shoulder.
Yeah, he didn't have the authority he went on to have, did he? I mean, by no means. And that's why, I guess, the bad apples, they had to go.
What was really interesting, I suppose, is that United tried to retire McGrath. He was still reasonably young. Was he 30 or just under 30? And they tried to pay him off. They tried to give him £100,000 and get him to retire rather than sell him to another team.
Well, I think all Aston Villa fans and Ireland fans are happy that didn't work out.
Yeah, and it sounds like he was thinking about it. But then he spoke to his buddies and they were like, nah, don't do that. Around this time is the first time he nearly killed himself. And he got really drunk at Whiteside's house. They went drinking over there and he decided to drive home and he crashed the car into a wall. And then this cycle of kind of, this getting drunk, doing something really regrettable, and then, this kind of this guilt that he felt afterwards. He took a lot of paracetamol and ended up in hospital and in the headlines. He was banned from driving.
Yeah, and he must have been very frightened about the new regime at United, because they had Gordon Strachan. Gordon Strachan told him that they should be afraid. This was a new, harder manager. Strachan knew his days were numbered, and I think that really got into McGrath's head.
Do you know what I thought was interesting there was McGrath doesn't say this, but he says that Strachan, had problems with Ferguson. But then Ferguson was obviously playing Strachan quite a bit because Strachan was kind of reporting to Ferguson on the other players, I think. That was the impression I got.
Yeah, that did seem like that. But on the other hand, he was a mole.
Yeah, he was a mole. Yeah.
Little mole Strachan.
So
a quick word.
Yeah, velocity.
There it is.
McGrath, and he says that going back to his time in the orphanage, he would just kind of shut down and shut off when people shouted at him, and he felt that every interaction he had with Ferguson was Ferguson, giving him the hairdryer treatment, and then Ferguson, for his part, would say that he just couldn't get any reaction out of McGrath. McGrath would just look vacantly into space or at the ground or whatever. So it just wasn't working for them.
But yeah, that's it. The days were very much numbered with Fergie.
It was Venables initially came from with Spurs, but it was Graham Taylor at Aston Villa who got our man, and Graham Taylor had a hard time in Ian Wright's book. But by golly, is he lovely in this book? He's a nice man, Graham Taylor.
I think that is generally accepted by all accounts.
That he is a nice man.
Right. Yeah, he did seem like a nice man.
Yeah.
And an excellent football manager. And he did great at Villa with his Route 1 football.
But he had a shocking start to his time at Villa. Like I say, these changes in circumstance, they just don't suit McGrath. And he was playing drunk. He was playing shit. And so this would be the second, by my count, suicide attempt. He slit his wrists at home in front of his son, Christopher, who was only like 4 or 5 at the time.
Yeah, again, and he describes it almost nonchalantly. It was just something he did. He talks about it possibly being a suicidal gesture, but man, you've got to be adult, with your kid there. You've got to be really adult. It's a horrible, sad and sordid story.
He turned it around in a playing sense. And that year, Villa ended up finishing second. He was the Aston Villa player of the year 4 years in a row. And it was because he was only with Taylor briefly. And I think this is something that he really regrets, that Taylor wasn't able to stay around, because I think he was very happy in that kind of setup. But yeah, Taylor was off to manage England to not qualify for the 1994 World Cup. And to ruin Al's trip to Cyprus.
Well, if anything, it improved my trip to Cyprus. I could just get on with my life.
Joseph Englos comes in.
Joe Venglos. First ever foreign manager in the Premier League. First ever foreign manager in England, right?
He was a sports scientist, and he was kind of, McGrath says he was probably a bit ahead of his time, but he was very mild-mannered. And I think ultimately, in a kind of an English football dressing room at the time, this kind of like boffin type approach maybe wasn't really appreciated. Yeah,
so Joseph Venglos didn't last. And who do we get back? Our old friend, Big Ron.
The book is a interesting and harrowing insight into addiction, isn't it? Because you see in McGrath, his reaction to Atkinson is, on the one hand, okay, good. I like Ron. Ron understands me. Ron will let me not really train. I'll be in the team. But then this kind of other voice in his head is saying, and Ron will let me drink. That's what he's saying really to himself.
Yeah, as long as he, as we've talked about before, turns up on the Saturday, Ron
Yeah.
doesn't care.
And it wasn't just booze either. Like he's regularly on, these kind of prescription painkillers, which he kind of lashes back like they're M&Ms.
Yeah, and he also kind of says that people who take real drugs is like, oh, I never took any of the illegal drugs, only prescription drugs for me. Good for you.
When Atkinson comes in and they go to Hamburg and he goes missing, there's search parties out to get him. But then they went to play friendly in Dublin, and this was a big deal, because it was Villa were kind of going to Dublin because of McGrath. So he was hammered. And this guy, Jim Walker, is saying to Atkinson, look, he can't play. He's fucked. You can't play him. And Atkinson is like, we're kind of here because of him. Not only am I going to play him, he's going to be captain. So he goes out to play this game, absolutely smashed. And then there's a free kick. And apparently,
a free kick.
Yeah, apparently McGrath, while brilliant, never really seemed to kind of, overstretch himself in any sense. He did what he was very comfortable doing on the pitch. He was never, like some of the people say, kind of maybe they could have expected a bit more from him here or there. But so he'd never take a free kick, but then suddenly he came dashing up to take this free kick because he was drunk. And he took a really long run up and just ran up to it and kicked the ground and fell off himself.
Jolly good stuff. Yeah, he does come across as that as a player, because I only knew him as a centre back, but he was a real water carrier, wasn't he? And he was always happy. He says why don't you try and spray it around a bit? And he's like, no, I'll just give it.
He is a complicated character in the sense that everybody said he was really nice, he was really humble, but there is an ego there, and he knows. Like one of the things that's consistent in the book is that he would really get himself into terrible scrapes when he came back to Ireland for international matches or for personal business or whatever. But that's because he had this status. Obviously, he had this in Birmingham because he was a legend in Villa as well. But in Ireland, the whole country would just loved him. And like he tells one story at one stage about they're in Limerick, and at this point he's playing under Charlton, and Charlton has kind of got his number to some extent. He also indulges him, but he won't let him drink, and he has him locked in his bedroom with a man stationed outside the bedroom to stop McGrath going down from drinking. And then McGrath remembers that he got the phone number off a fan who had given him some kind of award, like, players award in Limerick. And he called up this random man and said, please bring me some drink. And your man's like, I've got some poutine, so like hooch, moonshine. And McGrath's like, yeah, anything. So this random fella, he explains to him about the fella at the door. This random fella brings the drink to McGrath. McGrath says he opens the door, took the drink from him and just slams the door in his face, more or less. And then just whatever drinks it, obviously. But again, it's quite an insight into addiction, I guess, and into how he would operate in order to get his hands on booze.
All his bad actions, he always blames on being an alcoholic. It's always the alcoholic that does the bad things. It's not Paul McGrath. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, the alcoholic in me made me do this and that. And again, I'm sure that's absolutely right. And I don't want to do him down. But yes, he doesn't. I don't think he ever takes full responsibility for exactly what he does.
He does call himself a coward repeatedly, but he does give himself a pass. I think you're right.
I'm absolutely sure he does.
Yeah, the psychology of it is kind of, it's kind of like, it's very kind of warped in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, it was that person that did that, but I'm Paul McGrath. That alcoholic did that to you. It's one of those things. It's like, and I'm sorry for what he did. Well, it was you, Paul. You were the alcoholic. One
thing that's hard to keep track of is the number of times he tried to hurt himself and kill himself. So he kind of deals with the Ireland career stuff a bit later, but he does talk about how in '88 they played against England and they beat England in the Euros. Now, for Ireland, like, this would have been at a major competition, playing against England, beating England. Like, this is like, what a perfect combination for an Ireland team anyway. But so this elevated their status like to something I think beyond anything that any of them really could have understood or predicted. So they were all up on this high, and they were. I don't know if you've ever heard the 1990 Ireland song for the World Cup.
No, I've not.
It's quite good actually. Anyway, give it a lash, Jack. And so they were singing this. They were recording this for the 1990 World Cup, and he was getting smashed. And then he kind of was falling over the place. So Mick Byrne, the physio, had to take him out and bring him home to the hotel. But they're in a taxi on the way back to the hotel, and just inexplicably, he just tries to jump out of the moving taxi.
Again, not in his right mind. Not in his right mind.
Anyway, okay, Premier League. The Premier League and Villa are good.
Yeah, Villa were good back in the day. I never realised Dalian Atkinson was such a good player.
Poor Dalian Atkinson is dead now.
Yeah, he is dead.
He was murdered, wasn't he?
Webber Stumming, wasn't it?
Yeah.
With the cop.
Yeah, he was murdered.
That's terrible.
Yeah, Atkinson apparently was amazing, but then he had an injury, and someone in the book says maybe it was Atkinson, or McGrath says that he was never quite the same afterwards. But with Atkinson and Saunders, they reckon they were McGrath reckons they were the best strikers in the league at the time.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that he calls Dean Saunders one of his best friends in football. Dean Saunders is a total weapon, isn't he? He's an absolute tool of a man.
I think he played in McGrath's testimonial, and McGrath couldn't really move, and Saunders was really, really running rings around him, which is not what you're supposed to do in a testimonial, because it was like Ireland versus the rest of the world kind of setup.
Yeah, that's right. Rest of the world. Dean Saunders.
From Wales, England and Wales.
Yeah, he is from not Ireland. Yeah. The best of the rest of the world. It's Dean Saunders, everyone.
But yeah, so that was that first Premier League. United won the league by 10 points, but they seem to think that had they not drew to Oldham on the same day United beat Wednesday, that they would have won somehow. So I don't know.
Yeah, if that had gone that way and that had gone that way. Well,
and Atkinson with his injury as well. That's the other thing.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe Villa would have won the league. You look at the list of players, I'd say the Man United players were better. Maybe that's why Man United won the league.
Yeah, Sean Teal. Who was in goal? Was it Spink? The excellently named Nigel Spink.
Nigel Spink of a wonky face. Keepers in the old day looked like keepers, didn't they? Not anymore. They're like bloody Calvin Klein models. Fucking Allison there with his beautiful face. Going back to his wife a little bit, here, for me, he does not come across well. Not at all. I mean, he perpetually cheats on her. He has a woman in Birmingham, right? A woman in Manchester. There's women all over the place for him. I mean, this is awfully sordid. One of them was a junkie, right? And he just used to go around a house. And that's who he had a child with, I believe. Awful. But then, one of his friends, who he does not name, he used to leave behind in Manchester with his wife, Claire. And they eventually started a relationship, which I believe was ongoing, and certainly at the time of the writing of the book. And he is apoplectic, right? He'll never speak to this guy again.
Yeah, he said, I will always detest him.
I will always detest him. I mean, dude.
Because Claire kind of, in spite of this absolutely appalling treatment that you describe, kind of was still looking out for him years later when his second marriage fell apart. But so he got this woman pregnant. He learned that it was the news. It was going. One of the remarkable things about McGrath, how he managed to keep so many things out of the press. Like for years, nobody knew anything about his drinking problems, and it seemed like in Ireland, journalists were kind of knew about it and wouldn't publish things. Whereas in England, I think maybe the Villa did a good job of keeping his his dirty laundry out of the public, but. This new story about his child that he knew about, like this child was not a new baby, like when this was breaking. That was how I interpreted it. Like the baby was like a year and a half old. Sure. And it was going to break in the news. So he and Claire were about to adopt a girl from Romania. And this was going to break, so he had to break the news to Claire, and that was the end of their relationship. And then Claire had a breakdown of her own and had an overdose, and she ended up in the Priory, which McGrath was in and out of this Priory.
Yeah, can you imagine the old adoption agency? Hello? Oh, yes. But the name? I don't know about that, Mr. McGrath.
Yeah, so when she is in the Priory, Paul gets with Caroline, who he subsequently marries, and they're married for 11 years. It was around this time that United beat Villa in the League Cup. So you have this incredible, his life is kind of just falling apart, and there he is winning the Rumbelows Cup. I think United were going for the treble that year, wasn't it? When Andrej Kanchelskis got sent off for handballing on the line in a 3-1 loss to Aston Villa.
I think you maybe remember that better than I do.
Yes, I do remember that one well. So he woke up the night before that game in excruciating pain, and poor Jim Walker gets a bang on the door. Jim Walker's probably used to this stage, but he's like, Jim, no, seriously, this is not about drink. He's got this excruciating pain in his shoulder, and he later finds out that he was diagnosed. Sorry, this wasn't 96. This was 94. He was later diagnosed with Bell's palsy, which is, the symptoms are excruciating pain and kind of eventual paralysis. So by the time he played through this pain, then by the time they got to the World Cup for Ireland, his arm was just hanging by his side. It's kind of fucking crazy, isn't it?
Well, that's what you want from your heroes, isn't it? Like playing through the pain. That's the ultimate. It's like Terry Butcher with the bloody rags on his head. Like that's what you want. Like look at that lad.
And
Nothing
of
will
course,
stop him.
Al Bond in his imaginary European Cup wins. Presumably, both of your arms are like just dangling down by your side, and your head is all patched up.
Well, I've certainly taken a kicking. I have, but it's not stopped me. I've got a big heart. Lovely
Yes.
big heart.
A lion heart.
Your words, not mine, JC.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is when he tries to kind of explain the pandemonium around the Ireland team. Maybe it was just being on the international stage for the first time or something. But yeah, the whole country, I think, was kind of inebriated by Italia 90 and USA 94.
Everyone loves the Ireland football team, don't they? Certainly back in the day, we all loved them. Everybody loved them. Maybe not some of the English hooligans.
Like, so Charlton and his team kind of had, as I said, they kind of had McGrath's number. And it's quite remarkable. So they'd be like liaising with Aer Lingus, like the national airline, to find out which plane, like, so McGrath, because he's just kind of manipulative, kind of like slippery character, wouldn't really let them know if he was coming in from Manchester, if he was coming in from Birmingham. So they had to kind of hook up with the airline to find out, like.
Yeah, it's astonishing. And Aer Lingus were willing to talk us. They told him everything.
Yeah, and then McBurn would be just waiting in a car on the tarmac. So the airport were also part of it as well. Like, yeah, just drive out there now.
Yeah, he got wheeled in a wheelchair a few times as well. Like, who's that? Oh, I don't mind that. It's just an old fella.
McGrath be like Hannibal Lecter being brought to like international matches.
That really works, eh? Like there is lashing like nice Chianti. Yeah. There's another time with the Ireland team, and I know it's only time that makes this funny, but they were back in Dublin. There was a Bryan Adams concert that night. Some of the young lads wanted to go. He's the old like Phil Foden. Oh, Bryan Adams is playing tonight. Come on, Gaffer, let us go, please. Like, you young whippersnappers, with your rock music. Hope you play Summer of '69.
Atkinson, he got the bullet after a historically bad run for Aston Villa, but all the players thought that he turned it around. I think all the players were probably just, having a nice time and were happy enough with Ron, because Ron does sound like a whole lot of fun. He got the boot, and in came Brian Little, who doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun. No,
not at all.
He wasn't keen on McGrath from the start, and he signed a young tyro by the name of Gareth Southgate.
In fairness to McGrath, at this point, he is old, isn't he? He's like 36 by this stage, and he's not trained for 10 years.
Yeah.
You could imagine why a manager would perhaps be looking to the future.
Sorry, before we get to Villa, we can go back to Ireland, because he says that at USA 94, he reckoned that Big Jack wasn't really, didn't have the same kind of hunger. He spent his whole time in America complaining about the weather, about the heat. They were down in Florida, actually. Yeah, they were in Orlando. And Jack was gone soon afterwards. He was manager for the next Euros campaign, but we were put out by the Dutch in a playoff.
No, the old Ireland playing in Orlando. I know at least one lad who came for that game and has never gone home. I know
Really?
at least one lad. Yeah, they loved it. I bet there are stories like in bars, like just the bartender, the bar owner, just like stick those crates again. It's just stick them there. Don't worry about it. Just put them in, and they're just keeping the bars open all night long. There's a few stories like that I've heard.
Really?
In bars around there, yeah. But what can you imagine? The island in Orlando in '94. I mean, it would have been nuts. Absolutely nuts.
My dad went to that.
Did he?
Yeah. So when Charlton went, he said what was interesting is that he doesn't think any players would call Charlton. He played 83 times for Ireland, and other than I think he said 8 caps, they were all under Charlton. And he says he didn't give him a shout written to say best of luck or anything like that. And he says that's just the way football is. People are always, someone's always getting fired, someone's always moving on. He says it's quite a brutal game.
Although he remembers when people have had a kind word for him. There's a couple of occasions where players have had a kind word for him or managers, and he's like, "Oh, I always remember that classy move." Well,
It sounds like you're not as big a fan of Paul McGrath, people across the water here.
No, and I don't know. I don't want to sound like that. I really don't, because I've got nothing against the lad. I just, in the book, it's just, it's not self-justification, and he's really brutally honest. I just don't think he really is accountable for some of his shittier stuff.
Yeah, Charlton goes. McCarthy comes in, and again he finds himself in the same situation. McCarthy kind of had him out, and then he plays him. He ends up back in the team. But yeah, it's this Bryan Adams concert, which kind of ends McGrath's Ireland career. This illustrious Ireland career brought to a premature end by a Bryan Adams concert. So he was in the hotel, and there's a decision that everybody has to go to this concert, and he's like, "I'm not going to a fucking Bryan Adams concert." He says everybody has to go, and they're like, "Surely someone could have been like, do we really have to push McGrath to a concert?" So he got hammered, and he didn't travel in the end. And this is exactly what you said, like Mick McCarthy. So there's this big scene, and then Mick McCarthy comes in and shakes his hand and says, "Look, I hope you can get the help that you need." Like really classy about the whole thing,
Yeah, exactly that. Ireland
moved on to a famous 3-2 loss away to Macedonia.
That's more like it.
Yeah, anyway, okay. So I didn't remember that Villa won the League Cup under Brian Little.
No, nor did I, to be honest.
I
have no recollection of that game. I've genuinely no recollection of that game at all.
It was about 1996. You're talking about nearly 30 years ago,
I remember other League Cup final. Well, maybe I don't actually, but yeah, that's. But well done, Villa, for doing that. That's good, and glad McGrath got some silverware there.
That's how his Ireland career finishes with this Bryan Adams concert. But in the book, his club career just kind of tails off a bit, doesn't it?
Well, Johnny, he ends it in the complete shit, doesn't he? He ends up at Derby and Sheffield United, 2 more appalling teams you couldn't ask for. What a horrible way to end an illustrious career.
You know what? Your man Jim Walker, the physio, was like, "I loved Paul, but I was happy when he went." I'd say you were, Jim. Fucking hell, yeah. So just a couple of things. Like for a fella who kind of used football as his comfort blanket, throughout his kind of very troubled life, he's obviously going to struggle with the transition into not being a player. And when this book came out, the thing that people all talked about were these incidents where he drank the Domestos. So he drank Domestos twice, absolutely bonkers, right?
I mean, that's absolutely nuts. And then he's like, "Oh, I best drink some water."
Yeah,
I didn't realise that would be good enough. Frankly, what? Yeah, crikey, the domestos,
So
blimey.
he drinks it. He says, "I just lie down now," and then he says his chest was all just burning, and he said, "Oh, I think my insides are turning to sludge," and then he just drank water, and he was fine. This is
Yeah, and it's
not
still fine.
this is not
Yeah,
a good
not a great
lesson.
advert for kids. No, it's not. Like,
No.
yeah, if you feel your intake in it's burning, if you've drunk some bleach, make sure you drink some water. Call an ambulance, kids. Call an ambulance.
Yeah, I think I counted like maybe 4 near suicides or suicide attempts or like cries for help if you want, whatever they were, using pills. There was he cut his wrists. He drove the car into the wall. He drank the Mestos twice, and he had another drink driving, which crash, which wasn't a suicide attempt. But yeah, like Jesus Christ, how did he survive all of these? It's quite remarkable. But there's a little passage I wanted to read. He The snapshots of chaos are endless. One night in Dublin, I was picked up by the Gardaí, slumped in a narrow, syringe-filled alley with drunks and down-and-outs, swigging from a cheap bottle of sherry. Another time I woke up alone in a caravan on a beach somewhere north of Dublin. Where or how I got to either place has never been explained. The worst thing is afterwards is not knowing where you've been, who you've been with, what you were doing. You try to piece the jigsaw together, and you dread the phone call saying, "Jesus, you were in some state last night." And then he goes on. He says, guilt kicks in ferociously afterwards. But guilt is routine in the addict's world. It never seems powerful enough to overcome the next temptation. That's very bleak, isn't it?
It really is bleak. Yeah, it is sad, and it's difficult to make a lot of jokes. As you say, it's not a funny book, and he's not had a fun. I guess at times he must have had fun, right? When he was hanging out with Whiteside as a kid or as a younger man, it must have been fun.
See, I think he did. I think he did enjoy a lot of it. That's the thing.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right there. But
Like,
he doesn't want to say that in the book.
yeah, I think he did enjoy a lot of it. I think he loved, the glory of it. Fair enough. I think most people probably do. And I think that he was unable to drink and he did some crazy self-destructive things, but I think he did enjoy himself along the way. And I hadn't read this book before, but lots of people in Ireland have. Like, this was a big book in Ireland. It was written by a well-known, like the ghostwriter is a well-known Irish journalist, Vincent Hogan. It was a big book at the time because of McGrath's profile. And a lot of people talked about how bleak it was. And that was kind of why I didn't read it, actually. But I did get the inkling, even though he doesn't say it, that he did enjoy himself along the way.
Yeah, I'd say so. And the last chapter is little tributes to him from various people important in his life. There's a funny story whereby Ferguson says he's at a dinner. Bertie Ahern, the Irish Prime Minister's there. There's 2 security guards. Bertie Ahern goes to the bathroom. The security guards don't go with him. He's like, "Why aren't they going with him?" He's like, "No, those security guards are for Paul McGrath, like, to keep him out of trouble." It's like, blimey.
And he
He's
says,
bigger news in Ireland than the Prime Minister.
yeah.
Keep going.
That was nice, that bit, wasn't it? Yeah.
That was nice. But then, and this is my problem, the very final word in the book he leaves to his son, Jordan. He shouldn't carry any guilt over what we've been through because we don't carry any burdens. He's a good dad. It's still a really, really proud feeling just to be walking down the street with him. Oh, I didn't like that. Wheeling out your kid to say something nice about your dad after everything he's put him through, domestos, cutting your wrists, all that business. And this is his younger kid, so maybe he's not been through as much. I found that unsavory.
Unsavory. Yeah, well, I hear what you're saying, yeah. And like, it's funny, I think, because he says repeatedly, like, he acknowledges the damage that he's done to his children and the awful things that he's put them through, and he repeatedly describes himself as a coward. But I think you are right when you say that he does kind of see himself a little bit removed from those actions.
Yeah, it wasn't Paul McGrath. It was the alcoholic Paul McGrath.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That is interesting. Yeah, I don't know what to do with that now, Al.
No, again, I'm not really hard on him because I do think, I mean, crikey, his childhood made Joey Barton's childhood seem like a week in Disney World, right? I mean, it was horrible. And what he's been through has been genuinely incredibly traumatic.
Yeah.
Incredibly, right? No kid should have that childhood.
And also the just being a black orphan in Ireland in his youth, like honestly, Al, I can tell you, I remember the first time I saw a black person, and I grew up in Ireland in the 80s and the 90s. He was grown up like 20 years earlier. Like I couldn't think of a worse, okay, war or whatever, but like,
No, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, he must have been exposed to so much racism.
So much racism. It just must have been astonishing,
And just a poor kid, and he hasn't even got a loving family behind him to withstand it. It's there. He's a poor kid in a Borstal. It's ever such a sad story.
There was a few bits there at the start which I found just really, really heartbreaking. Really, like, just to think of any kid in those kind of circumstances, it's just horrible. Like,
and the whole catatonic thing. I mean, that's some deep-seated stuff. Like, I mean, crikey, Mikey. I mean, what happened there? Poor kid.
Yeah. So in terms of the book, like, it's not a laugh. From an Irish perspective, it covers, like, that kind of halcyon days of the Irish football team. So that's a whole pile of fun. It's just, yeah, I really did enjoy it, but it's not something that you're going to be, you're not going to be laughing as you turn the pages or anything.
No, but it's, as a piece of literature, it is good, and it is an insight into the mind of an addict, isn't it? I think I could have done with a little bit more football, and I could have done with a little bit more jollity, but equally, that is not the primary thing in his life. His addiction is his number one thing in his life, and that must be awfully difficult for him.
But yeah, I think it was one of, or maybe the best book that we've read so far. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5.
Yeah, I'll give it a 4 out of 5. I think I'd read Wrighty's book again first, but yeah, it's a good book and a decent insight into the mind of Paul McGrath, and I would genuinely love to know how he's getting on now.
Yeah, so that's Paul McGrath back from the brink, and I hope he is really back from the brink now. Thank you very much, Al, and I want to say thanks again to Colin Morgan, and all the best against St. Pat's.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, folks. I believe our next book's going to be Peter Crouch.
We'll do a little robot dance.
Yeah, he did a robot dance, didn't he? Also, I believe he's quite tall.
That's the book. We don't even have to do it.
The Tall Robot Man. Is that what it's called? I think it is.
Yeah. Is it called iRobot?
I don't think it is. Very good. All right, then. So next time, fun laddish banter rather than a trip into despair.
Top bands. Thank you, and follow us on the old socials. We have a TikTok now, Al.
Oh, TikTok. Thank you very much, Johnny.